Order. Questions to the Prime Minister. Charlotte Leslie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others, and in addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Charlotte Leslie.
Thank you very much. Does the Prime Minister agree with me, and I think much of the nation, that the best way to celebrate the birthday of the NHS and its 65th birthday is for the government to strip out the culture of secrecy and cover-up that we've seen so strongly in Morecambe amidst staffs, and put patient safety and empowered professionals back at the heart of the NHS?
I think my honourable friend is absolutely right. The way to celebrate the NHS's 65th birthday is to go on investing in it like this government is, with an extra £12 billion, but also to be on the side of patients, and that's why we're introducing the Chief Inspector of Hospitals, who will make a real difference. And yes, we do need to end the culture of secrecy and cover-up that we had under Labour.
Mr. Ed Miliband.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure I speak for everyone in this House when I say there is deep concern about what we've witnessed over the past few days in Egypt, including appalling violence and deaths just a year on from free elections. Can I begin by asking the Prime Minister for assurances that all the appropriate steps are being taken by the government to guarantee the safety of UK nationals in that country?
I can certainly give him that assurance, and also to safeguard our embassy in Cairo. And I should also add that we are advising British nationals against all but essential travel to Egypt, except for the Red Sea resorts, as set out on the Foreign Office website. He's right that these are deeply disturbing scenes. The level of violence is appalling. We should appeal to all sides to calm and stop the levels of violence, and particularly the sexual assaults. It is not for this country to support any single group or party. What we should support is proper democratic processes and proper government by consent.
Ed Miliband.
Mr. Speaker, I agree with the Prime Minister, and all of us want to see a peaceful resolution to the present crisis. Therefore, can the Prime Minister tell the House what work is being done, even at this late stage, by the UK and indeed by the European Union to encourage the Egyptian government to secure a negotiated political solution to this crisis in advance of today's Egyptian army deadline?
Well, what I can tell the right honourable gentleman is that very clear messages have been sent to President Morsi, including by President Obama, who spoke with him directly, but we have also been communicating through our ambassadors that yes, he has a democratic mandate and we respect that, but democracy also means ensuring that everyone has a voice and that leaders have a responsibility to represent all Egyptians and show they are responsive to their concerns. That is what the government needs to do in order to bring about peace and stability in that country.
Ed Miliband.
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful for the Prime Minister's answer, and I know that he and indeed the Foreign Secretary will keep the House updated in the coming days. Let me turn to another subject. Mr. Speaker, the country will need 240,000 extra primary school places by 2014. Can the Prime Minister assure parents that this won't be met by increasing primary school class sizes?
What I can assure him is that we put in place, through the spending review, the additional money for 500,000 extra school places. So we should be able to provide those school places without seeing an increase in classes.
Ed Miliband.
But, Mr. Speaker, class sizes are rising. When the Labour government came to office, the number of infants being taught in class sizes over 30 was a quarter. When we left office, it was just 1.8%. It's doubled on his watch, and that is the reality for lots of parents. Now, under his plans, 1/3 of new schools are being built in areas where there are surplus places. Can he explain to parents, in areas where they're struggling to get their children into primary schools, why he's spending money building schools where there are already plenty of places?
I have to say to the right honourable gentleman is what he left is the biggest budget deficit in Britain's peacetime history. Now, we have had to make difficult decisions. That is why we've cut welfare. That is why we've cut areas of spending. But on education, we have made it a priority. And that is why the amount of money going into our schools is going up and not down. That is why we're funding 500,000 extra school places. That is why this government has built 200 new school buildings since taking office. Now, he asks about new schools going into different areas. What that is code for is Labour's opposition to free schools. We want more new good schools. Their policy is still the same as John Prescott's policy. Do you remember that? The trouble with good schools is everyone wants to go to them. Well, we want good schools. But as ever, his questions are written by Len McCluskey of Unite.
Mr. Speaker, as always, this Prime Minister has no answers to the questions that he's asked. If he won't answer me, if he won't answer me, maybe he'll answer David Simmons. David Simmons, who is the Conservative spokesman for the Local Government Association. This is what he says, Mr. Simmons. We know of schools that are literally falling down and still have to compete with brand new builds down the road. In other words, in areas where there are surplus places. Isn't the truth that while he's pouring millions of pounds into building new schools where there are already places, the only way he's going to meet the shortage in other areas is teaching kids in porter cabins and increasing class sizes?
The fact is, the last Labour government cut primary school places. Let me tell him what this government is doing. The education capital budget is £21 billion over the next 6 years. That is what we are doing. But what is so interesting is that he's taking his script from the trade unions, who they don't like choice, they don't like new schools, they don't like free schools, they want to control everything. But what we know is one organisation they have got control of. We see it in black and white. They've taken control of the Labour Party.
Mr. Speaker, I am speaking for parents up and down this country.
The usual very low grade, very substandard, very unnecessary heckling. The session has to run longer, it has to run longer. Let's try to observe some decorum which the public can respect. Mr. Ed Miliband.
And let's have a debate about ethics. This is a Prime Minister who had dinners for donors in Downing Street. He gave a tax cut to his Christmas card list. And he brought Andy Coulson into the heart of Downing Street. The idea that he's lecturing us about ethics takes double standards to a whole new level. Now, in this one policy on schools, we see the hallmark of this government. They make the wrong choices on tax and spending. The millionaire's tax cut, the top-down reorganisation of the NHS, and schools in areas where there are surplus places. And all the time, they repeat the meaningless mantra, we're all in this together.
The right honourable gentleman goes up and down the country speaking for Len McCluskey. No wonder the former Home Secretary calls them the party of the graveyard. The fact is, I've got it here. I've got the press release, Mr. Speaker. How Unite plans to change the Labour Party. Look, I know you're paid to shout by Unite, but calm down a bit. This is what it says. We give millions of pounds to the party. The relationship has to change. We want a firmly class-based and left-wing general election campaign. That's what this week shows. Too weak to sack his health secretary. Too weak to stand up for free schools. Too weak to stand up to Unite Union. Too weak to run Labour. And certainly too weak to run the country.
Mr. Speaker. New rules mean my constituents in Redditch have to register individually if they want to vote to stop electoral fraud. Does my right honourable friend think the same rules should apply to joining a political party?
I think my honourable friend is absolutely right. Individual voter registration is a major step forward, but frankly we have a situation in this country where we've got one of our political parties where it's become apparent votes are being bought, people are being signed up without consent. You know, all done by the man, Len McCluskey, who gave him his job.
Stephen Timms.
Mr. Speaker. You know all about demand for food banks. Demand for food banks was 30,000 households in the year before the general election. It was 350,000 households last year. Unlike his noble friend, will the Prime Minister acknowledge that rocketing demand for food banks shows we have a problem?
Absolutely. Well, I'm sure as a member of Unite, the honourable member will want to look very carefully in his own constituency member, Labour Party. Who knows how many people that they've bought and put on the register? What I'd say to him is food bank use went up 10 times under Labour. That is what happened. And it's this government that is helping working people by freezing the council tax, giving 24 million people a tax cut and taking 2.4 million of the poorest people out of tax.
Mr. Philip Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister will be aware of the recent terrible stabbings in my constituency in Shipley, which led to the death of Louisa Denby, aged 84, and the serious injury to 9-year-old Jason Darcy, who was playing in the park. Will the Prime Minister join with me in praising the police for the swiftness of making arrests in this particular case, but also in supporting the local community and congratulating them on their steadfastness and their community spirit, which has helped this community get through a very, very traumatic period?
Yeah. Well, I certainly join the honourable member. These were truly shocking events, and reading about them this morning, particularly the young boy who staggered out of the park bleeding, having been stabbed, and reading about the grandmother who was described as someone who was so much a community member that they were seen as everybody's grandmother, is truly disturbing. I join him praising the police and praising the local community, and we must make sure that justice is done.
Mr. Clive Betts.
The government has promised that by 2016 no one will have to pay more than £72,000 towards the costs of their personal care. I don't know whether the Prime Minister had a chance to read an article in the Financial Times on Saturday which said the cap will actually not be on actual costs but eligible costs. And eligible costs will not include the costs of people meeting moderate care needs, nor indeed all the costs they have to incur in going to a private residential home. Isn't this another example of the Prime Minister promising to do one thing when in reality planning to do something completely different?
What we are introducing is what was debated and discussed in this House in terms of those costs that will be covered and those costs that won't be covered. But I have to say to him, the party opposite had 13 years to cap the costs of care, to do something about the rising costs of social care, and they did precisely nothing.
Anne McIntosh.
May I congratulate the government on achieving political agreement for the next round of CAP reform. But may I make a plea that proper time be taken to agree the implementation to ensure a level playing field and a fair deal for Britain and our farmers?
I think the honourable lady is absolutely right. I think we have got a good deal over the Common Agricultural Policy. I think we need to listen carefully to our farmers about their concerns so they're not disadvantaged as against other countries. And we also need to take the time to introduce the new system, because actually when the last system in terms of the single farm payments was introduced so quickly, we suffered rather large fines from Europe as a result. So I think she's extremely wise about this issue.
Mr. Geoffrey Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is the Prime Minister aware of the rather disturbing commitment given yesterday by his Chancellor that he will continue to interfere and intervene in the affairs of the Royal Bank of Scotland on behalf of the taxpayer? Is he aware that his last intervention in his last intervention, the completely irresponsible ousting of Stephen Hester has cost the British taxpayer so far £4.5 billion in the loss of value in its shareholding? Will he, as First Lord of the Treasury, instruct his Chancellor to desist from any such interventions in the future?
What I would say to the honourable gentleman, who I know has great experience in lending money, is that it's very important that the government stands up for the taxpayer and makes sure that Royal Bank of Scotland has the right strategy and the right leadership going ahead so that we get the money that was put by the last government into the banks, we get that money back.
To Julian Huppert.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. 2 days ago saw the start of Independent Retailers Month. Does the Prime Minister agree that we need to do more to support local independent shops, to keep our high streets vibrant and creative, and avoid takeover by multiple retailers and the formation of clone towns?
Well, on this issue, I very much agree with the honourable gentleman, and on this issue, I think he speaks for a lot of Britain. And that is that we should be looking at our town centres, working out what we can do through the Portus Review and in other ways to back our town centres. We should be looking at the rate system and how that works for our town centres. We should also, as we are, be looking at the planning system and how we can use change of use to back our town centres, and we should work with local authorities who want to see the town centres succeed. This is a vital issue for towns up and down our country, and it has my full backing.
Nicholas Brown.
Question number 7, Mr. Speaker.
I very much enjoyed my recent visit to the Nissan factory in Sunderland for the launch of the first mass-market electric vehicle fully produced in the UK, which will support over 500 jobs at the plant and 2,000 across Britain's car industry, and I look forward to visiting the North East again soon.
Nicholas Brown.
When the Prime Minister next visits the region, he will again see for himself that the key issue facing the region is unemployment. There are over 20 applicants for every advertised vacancy, and his policy of local enterprise partnerships and enterprise zones is not making the same effective impact on the region's economy as the Development Agency did. Will he consider the appointment of a minister to work with the local enterprise partnerships and the individual members of Parliament for the region to push forward the private sector employment agenda?
Well, ministers do work with the enterprise zones, and let me just give him the figures. Obviously, we want to see more, but employment in the North East is actually up by 9,000 since the election. The North East private sector jobs are up 37,000 since the election. It's not just the success at Nissan. We've obviously got Hitachi committed to building the new train building plant in County Durham. That will bring 700 jobs. We've also got the new Tyne Tunnel, which opened in 2011. The extra money going into the Tyne and Weir Metro. All of those things can make a difference. And of course, in the honourable member's own constituency, the youth claimant count has fallen by 4% over the last year.
Alan Beef.
Will the Prime Minister take the opportunity on his next visit to promote apprenticeships and the support that government is giving to them among North East businesses? And will you just take another look at the A1 in order to press the Ministry of Transport to get on with the job of doing it?
The last time I was in the North East, actually, I made a speech about apprenticeships, and I think it is remarkable the number of people who've started apprenticeships under this government. I can tell him in terms of the transport issue that he raises is actually we are funding feasibility studies into fixing problems on the A1 north of Newcastle to Scotland and the Newcastle Gateshead A1 Western bypass. And also we're improving the A19 between Newcastle and South Shields. This is a much better record. This is a much better record than the party opposite, even though they had a Prime Minister who came from the North East. They never did what we're proposing to do with the A1.
Fiona Berger.
Mr. Speaker, given the Prime Minister is so keen to talk about infrastructure investment, can he explain why his government has cut capital investment again in 2015-16 by nearly £1 billion?
I have to say to the Honourable Lady, she's wrong. If she looks at the figures, if you take the plans that Labour had for this Parliament, we've actually added to those plans and are increasing the amount of capital spending. But the real point is this: if you come to this House and you oppose changes on welfare, you oppose cuts to government programmes, you oppose the efficiency changes that we're making, and they haven't supported a single cut that we have made. If you do all those things, there's no way you'd have any capital spending at all. That is the problem with the weakness of the Labour front bench. Because they've taken no tough decisions, they can't support the capital spending this country needs.
Well, Harriet Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Prime Minister confirm reports from Jordan that a new treaty has been signed and that this country could have the pleasure of seeing the back of Abu Qatada as soon as this week?
I can confirm that this treaty has been taken through both the Jordanian Parliament and also our own, but I don't want to say anything that in any way could stop what we all want to happen happening.
John Cryer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When the government tried to get workers to exchange their rights for shares, we were told that 6,000 businesses would sign up. In the event, only 6 have even shown an interest. Not 600 or 60, but only 6. What went wrong?
6. Well, first of all, the programme hasn't started yet. It starts in September. And it's a programme that has been praised by the Institute of Directors, praised by the CBI, praised by the Federation of Small Businesses, but of course it hasn't been praised by Len McCluskey and the Unite Union. And of course, he's a member of the Unite Union, so he has to stick to their script. Well, what a sad day for democracy.
So we'll move on. Question 10, David Nuttall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question 10.
I very much I enjoy all my visits to Bury. I look forward to visiting again, and I always take special time to look at the statue of Sir Robert Peel.
Mr. David Nuttall.
Mr. Speaker, whenever the Prime Minister does next find time to sample the delights of Bury Ramsbottom and Tottington again, will he join me in meeting with some of the hundreds of local small businesses and charities who will be £2,000 a year better off from next April because of the new employment allowance, which will cut employers' national insurance contributions, giving them a real incentive to create genuine new jobs?
I think my honourable friend is absolutely right. You can now walk down any high street in any town in Britain and point out to shopkeepers and businesses that if they do employ people, they're going to see a £2,000 reduction in their national insurance bill. And if they don't employ people, they can take people on and not pay national insurance. Now, that is only possible because of the tough decisions this government has taken on public spending, on welfare, decisions that have never been backed by the party opposite, but it demonstrates we're on the side of people who work hard and want to get on.
Gus Robertson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister's deputy party leader in Scotland is describing the UK government's scaremongering about independence as silly, whilst one of his key donors in Scotland is describing it as puerile, and the country's leading Conservative commentator says it's tripe. Given the Prime Minister is in charge of Project Fear for the UK government, will he ditch this silly, puerile tripe?
I have a remarkable sense of déjà vu, Mr. Speaker, as I was asked precisely this question yesterday, and I'll give a different but pretty similar answer, which is if you look at the information that has been produced by this government on what would happen in terms of Scottish independence, I think it is impartial, extremely powerful, very sensible. And the fact is that the Scottish nationalists are losing the argument. They're losing the arguments on jobs, they're losing the argument on the economy, they're losing the argument on the influence that Scotland would have in the world. I say bring on the referendum because you're losing the battle.
Steve Baker.
Mr. Speaker, last Sunday, Wickham Rotarians raised over £10,000 for local underprivileged people. I feel sure the Prime Minister will join me in encouraging membership of the full range of voluntary service clubs in the community, but does he agree with me that those wonderful voluntary institutions stand in stark contrast to the kind of institution which would try to block by political influence despite...
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and it's a huge honour that I am an honorary member of my local Rotary Club in Witney. They're an important part of the big society, they raise a lot of money, they do an excellent job, and they certainly don't go round hoovering up members by making single payments from trade unions in order to buy influence.
Thomas Doherty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Back in March, the Climate Change Minister said, "I wouldn't be sleeping if we didn't have 10,000 signed up to the Green Deal by the end of the year." Given that so far only 4 households have signed up on the dotted line, is this Len McCluskey's fault as well?
The honourable gentleman is wrong. The honourable gentleman is wrong about the figures. The fact is 37,000 households have had Green Deal assessments and over 5,000 have had their boilers changed. Now, of course, sorry, I missed out that the honourable member for Dunfermline and West Fife, he too received sponsorship from the Unite Union. So I think, oh, you don't? Well, you better put the record straight. I suspect you ought to go through his constituency records, check all the members are still alive, that might be a good start.
Andrew Selous.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has quite rightly won much praise for his work on dealing with tax avoidance, but some people have called him hypocritical. What does he say to that?
Well, I think what is hypocritical is to take donations from a donor in the form of shares in order to avoid taxes. That is what the Labour Party has done. They should pay back that £700,000 to the taxpayer, and that money should be going towards schools and hospitals. That is Labour's shame. Gemma Doyle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Prime Minister confirm that the latest work programme figures show that it is missing every single one of its minimum performance standards?
If the Honourable Lady is asking about the work programme, the fact is that it's actually got 312,000 people into work. 60% of the people going into the work programme are coming off benefits. And while the Unite Union and all the Unite members opposite might not want to hear this, and while it might not be part of Len McCluskey's script, the fact is this programme is twice as good as the Flexible New Deal. Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a doctor who once had to listen incredulously to a patient explain via a translator that she only discovered she was 9 months pregnant on arrival at Terminal 3 Heathrow, I was very pleased to hear the Secretary of State for Health's statement on health tourism today. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that although the savings are modest, the principle matters? The health service should be national, not international.
I think my honourable friend makes a very important point. This is a national health service, not an international health service. British families pay about £5,000 a year in taxes to pay for our NHS, and it is right to make sure that those people who don't have a right to use our NHS get properly charged for it. Now, we've made this announcement. I hope there'd be all-party support for it, but Labour's Public Health Minister has condemned it as xenophobic, so I assume they are now going to oppose this sensible change, which working people in this country will roundly support.
Speaker, the bedroom tax is turning into a disaster in constituencies like mine. Families are moving out of good quality social housing and into the private rented sector at a greater cost to the taxpayer. 3- and 4-bedroom houses are now standing empty and are classed as hard to let. And I've even got pensioners approaching me saying they want to downsize, but they can't because small properties are prioritised for families. Is this not turning into a disaster for the taxpayer as well as for families?
What this is fair for the taxpayer, because we don't give a spare room subsidy to people in private sector accommodation, so we shouldn't give a spare room subsidy to people in council accommodation. But the question now is for the party opposite. We have decided to remove that spare room subsidy. They now say they support our spending changes. Well, they did for about 5 minutes last week. Is that still the case, or are they committed to repealing this? Absolutely no answer.
Mr. Burstow. Indeed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The shocking abuse that was revealed in Winterbourne View and by Operation Jasmine in Wales has revealed a gap in the law, which means whilst the staff get prosecuted, the organisations are never corporately accountable for what they are allowed to take place. Will the Prime Minister meet with me and a small delegation to discuss how we can plug this gap in the law and ensure there is proper accountability for abuse and neglect?
Well, I'm very happy to meet with the honourable gentleman about this issue because it is vitally important. I think in the Francis report there were a number of recommendations about duties of care and indeed duties of candour that we need to put in place, and I'm absolutely keen to make sure we get this done.
Mr. Ben Bradshaw.
The Royal Charter, approved overwhelmingly by this House, still not been sent to the Privy Council when it should have been in May. And will he assure this House and the victims that he won't do a deal with certain newspapers to further water down Lord Justice Leveson's recommendations?
What I can say to the right honourable gentleman is that we have to follow the correct legal processes, and the legal advice which we've shared with the Leader of the Opposition and his deputy is that we have to take these things in order. We have to take the Press's Royal Charter proposal first, and then we have to bring forward the Royal Charter on which we have all agreed. I have to say, I think the Press's Royal Charter has some serious shortcomings, so no, I haven't changed my view.
Richard Drax.
Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman wanted to be called. I've called him. You should be.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, very much indeed. I'm most grateful to you. given that the selection of parliamentary candidates is a legitimate concern of this House, would the Prime Minister agree with me that the voting irregularities in the Falkirk constituency should be looked at as a matter of urgency?
Order! The question's about a party matter. It's not a matter of government responsibility. Not a matter not a matter for the Prime Minister. Complete waste of time. Mr. Peter Bone.
Mr. Speaker, the all-party group against human trafficking has raised the awareness of modern-day slavery to a great level. I'm delighted to report last night 158 right honourable members of this House and the other House attended the AGM. That is a credit to the Prime Minister's personal commitment to this. Would he consider, perhaps in the next Queen's speech, having a modern slavery act?
No, I pay tribute to the honourable member for the consistent work that he's done on this vital issue. It is really important that we wipe out modern-day slavery, and I very much enjoyed going to meet with him and other members in the House of Commons in order to see just how bad the situation is. We are looking at legislative options, and I will be chairing a committee across government to look at what more can be done.
Glenda Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of my constituents and her 3-year-old child had become homeless, fleeing the most heinous domestic violence. And now, despite legally living and working in this country for 4 years, an immigration technicality has made them destitute. Will the Prime Minister please examine this legislation and its possibly unintended consequences, so in future no woman and her child may suffer double abuse?
Well, I'm very happy to look at the individual case that the honourable lady raises, and it does actually link to the last question about modern-day slavery, where sometimes immigration rules have caused difficulty for those who want to flee the people who are keeping them entrapped in their homes. So I'm very happy to take up the individual case.
George Freeman.
Speaker, would my right honourable friend agree that the shocking catalogue of revelations of NHS management failures highlight the importance of the government's quiet revolution of patient empowerment and accountability we need to modernise the NHS so it becomes driven by the patients who pay for it, who it's there to serve?
I think my honourable friend is absolutely right. Look, I'm a huge fan and believer in our NHS, and at its best, it provides the best care in the world and incredible compassion for families who use it. But we don't serve the NHS if we hide or cover up when there are difficulties in individual hospitals. Clearly there were in Stafford, there were in Morecambe Bay, and we read today, of course, there are in the Thameside Hospital too. That is why the reform of the CQC and the Chief Inspector of Hospitals post is so important. That is why the Friends and Family test that's going to be applied in every part of every hospital over time, I think will make a real difference. And it is in stark contrast to what we had under the last government, where inspectors were basically told not to surface problems because it was somehow embarrassing for the government.
Paul Flynn.
Was it his conception, when he set up the Office of Police and Crime Commissioners, that a fine chief constable, such as the one in Gwent, should have a career cut short by a vindictive bully who told her to resign or he would humiliate her?
Well, the point of having police and crime commissioners is to make sure there is proper accountability, and that police constables have to account to a local person, and that is why a number of former Labour members of Parliament stood for this post. In some cases, like John Prescott, the people of his region saw sense and rejected him.